Imagine a young man, barely 20, living a double life in the heart of Texas. This is the story of Roddy Dean Pippin, a modern-day cattle rustler. In 2003, Roddy moved into a quaint two-bedroom house in Odell, Texas, complete with a stable for his horse and a long driveway for his Dodge pickup and cattle trailer. Roddy was the epitome of a cowboy: starched Wranglers, Justin boots, and a $500 Resistol hat. He was always polite, tipping generously and chatting about the weather and cattle business. But behind this charming facade, Roddy was a professional cattle rustler, stealing over 130 head of cattle worth around $100,000 in just 18 months. Using broken mesquite limbs to cover his tire tracks and an electric brand to mark stolen cattle, Roddy was meticulous in his operations. He even formed a rustling gang with two dim-witted twin brothers and their girlfriends, making his heists more efficient. In August 2004, law enforcement finally cornered Roddy. To their surprise, he was a well-mannered, courteous young man with no criminal record. Roddy was also a severe diabetic, injecting insulin up to 6 times a day, hardly the image of a hardened outlaw. Scott Williamson, a respected field inspector, couldn't understand why such a polite young man would turn to cattle rustling. Roddy's fascination with the Old West began in his childhood, leafing through picture books and watching John Wayne movies. He even tried to join a rodeo team in college but dropped out after injuring his knee, leading him down a different path. Desperate and in debt, Roddy decided to give cattle rustling a try, inspired by stories of old rustlers and the rising price of cattle. He built a wooden crate for his pickup and started stealing calves, selling them at auction barns with forged documents. Roddy's rustling skills improved, and he began targeting wealthier ranches, avoiding poor ranchers to maintain a twisted sense of morality. He moved to the Red River Valley, perfecting his techniques and gaining the trust of cattle by sitting with them for hours. Roddy's gang had a few missteps, including a chase down the highway and a near-death experience with a stampeding herd. Despite these setbacks, Roddy continued his rustling spree, evading detection by stealing small numbers of cattle from the back sections of ranches. He always sold the stolen cattle at auction barns far from the theft sites, replacing ear tags and branding them with his DP brand. Scott Williamson finally got a lead on Roddy in July 2004 but initially found no records of his cattle sales due to a misspelled name. Roddy knew the posse was getting close but decided to pull off one last big rustle before quitting for good. His plan was to steal an 18-wheeler filled with steers and sell them in St. Louis or Kansas City, but he decided to do one more job with his gang first. In early August, Roddy and Daryl stole 8 head of cattle, but they were followed by a determined woman who had seen them before. A wild chase ensued, ending with Roddy, Daryl, and Melissa being arrested. Roddy's polite demeanor and lack of a criminal record surprised the authorities. Roddy confessed to dozens of thefts, explaining that rustling had gotten into his blood, but the authorities showed no mercy. He received 4 consecutive 2-year sentences with no chance of parole, a harsh punishment for a young man with no prior record. In prison, Roddy began writing stories about his rustling days, hoping to become the next Louis L'Amour. His health deteriorated due to his diabetes, and his lawyers sought an early release, claiming he needed better medical care. Roddy dreamed of sitting beneath an oak tree, dressed in his cowboy apparel, but his application for medical release was denied. A motion for shock probation was also denied, despite Roddy's heartfelt apologies and his mother's promise to keep him in line. Roddy's story ended with him being escorted back to prison, the sun shining on his face as he took one last look at the pastures he loved. Roddy's tale is a modern-day Western, a story of desperation, adventure, and the consequences of living a double life. Stay tuned for more incredible stories from the heart of Texas. In the land of cowboys, legends are born and rustlers are caught.